G'day everybody, welcome back to the Birders Guide for 2022. I missed you guys. It's been a couple of months, I think, since the last episode we put out. But unfortunately, Christmas and then New Year's and then family holidays, and then we had the birth of our daughter, Rose, about, I think she's 9 days old today. It's the 10th of Feb. So all of that has got in the way of everything, but that's okay. This is just how it is. Anyway, here we are, 2022. We've got some brilliant people lined up for the podcast. Hope you're going to enjoy it. A quick recap on the last 2 months of my birding. There's really only two things to discuss. All those other stuff got in the way of doing too much birding. Harvest. So I said during harvest that I was going to get 30 species, ended up with 56. That's not too shabby for just a 20-kilometer drive there and back. Highlights were probably the raptors. I wrote them down here so I wouldn't forget them. Got black falcon, brown falcon, peregrine falcon, including 2 nesting pairs. Australian hobby, black-shouldered kite, spotted harrier, Nanking kestrel, whistling kite, and wedge-tailed eagle. Didn't get a swamp harrier. One was seen... well, it would be like probably a good 40 kilometers away from here recently, but they're around swamp harriers. And probably the next most likely would have been a leatherwing kite. So did pretty well on the raptor front. So yeah, 56 species over harvest, killing it. The only other birding I've really done, I flew to Brisbane to pick up a new car. We needed a new car because now we've got 4 kids, need more seats. I asked my cousin Tate if he wanted to jump in with me for the 2-day drive back. Both quite keen on driving and birding and seeing the country. So we spent our first afternoon in Brisbane and then stayed at my sister-in-law and brother-in-law's house that night. They live in Brisbane. We went up to Mount Glorious. Didn't really see too much of interest. It was very foggy and very rainy, but we did see there was one stretch, I'm going to say probably 5 kilometers of bell miners just going mental the whole time. We wound the window down and was like, man, I hope that's not our car making that noise. And then we were like, man, this must be like, surely these aren't bell miners, surely these are cicadas or something. Like they were just, it was just non-stop noise for kilometers. Eventually we got out and actually found some so we could make sure that's what we were looking at. But yeah, huge amounts of bell miners. Anyway, that was about it for that day. The next morning we drove to O'Reilly's super early, about 4 a.m. To try and get there early enough to find some Albert's lyrebird. Unfortunately we got there and it was really foggy and really wet. But we had about an hour and a half up our sleeve before we needed to head back to Adelaide. So we used all that time. I don't know if I should say this. Gonna make me sound like a very poor birder. Anyway, I'm pretty sure that I'm the only person alive in the world that has been to O'Reilly's 3 times and has never seen a regent bowerbird. Correct. 3 times. So, I mean, that's a little bit of a caveat to that. Let me explain. The first time was at the end of a 31-day birding road trip that Tate and I went on probably 15 years ago. And this was like the last sort of birding stop. Then we were just going to drive from Lamington to Adelaide. But we got there super late at night, like 1 a.m., just camped. I'm pretty sure we didn't even camp in the campground. I think we just camped somewhere. We got up in the morning and we went on a walk. We got about 50 meters and we were so tired that we just turned around and went back to bed. And then got up when we woke up and drove to Adelaide. So that was my first time. The second time was with my wife, and we drove in. The car park was so busy. We would have had the closest place we could park our car. We would have had to have walked kilometers to get to the car park. So we just drove in, did a lap of the car park, drove home. So that was the second time. And this was the third time. It was raining. It was very foggy. We only had like an hour and a half, and we didn't see anything out of the ordinary. So 3 visits, 0 regent bowerbirds. Still haven't seen one. It's sort of after shining bronze cuckoo, which is my actual bogey bird. The regent bowerbird is my next one. It's the bird I've tried the most to find. I'm 99.9% sure I've seen one at Dorrigo National Park. We were walking through the forest and rainforest, and something black and gold shot into the rainforest out of the corner of my eye. Didn't see it enough to identify it, but you know, what else is it going to be? So anyway, pretty sure I've seen one, but haven't. Still to go. Anyway, the only other thing I wanted to say before we get into this conversation, I was talking to Martin after this conversation, and he was saying that he hoped our chat didn't come across as too pessimistic. His intention behind this book was to highlight some of his favorite birding experiences and just how fantastic birding can be. So just keep that in the back of your scon while you're listening along, but hope you enjoy it. It's a really good book. I'll put something where you can buy it, or a link to something about it and to his webpage in the show notes. Enjoy the conversation. I'm not going to put something at the end of this. Everything on the podcast statistics says that 95% of people stop listening as soon as the end of the conversation is done. So enjoy this conversation. Tune in a couple of weeks' time for another one. And until then, happy birding. So Martin, welcome to the Birders Guide. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me. Pleasure.
Now, we're going to talk about your book here, the Birding in the Age of Extinctions. But before we get into that, I'd just like to chat a little bit about yourself. So do you want to just give us a couple-minute rundown on, I guess, how you got to be where you are currently?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm now living in Canberra, but I spent a lot of time when in the last 20, 30 years in Hong Kong as where I went for work. And that's where I started birding. I worked at a university in Hong Kong, and I started birding in about 2003, 2004, 2000, somewhere around then.
Yeah.
And I've been an avid, keen birder ever since, traveling a lot. In the last few years, I haven't traveled quite so much, having come back to Canberra and with family connections and so on, and it's been difficult to travel. But I've done a lot of birding in Australia in the last few years. That's been great.
So what were you in Hong Kong for? Like, what was career, I assume?
Yeah, career. Yeah, my job took me there. I was a university professor and retired in 2014. So, but for about 15 years, 16 years before that, I was working in Hong Kong.
So you obviously, through reading your book and through reading your website, your blog, you've obviously done, you've fit a lot of birding into what, in birding circles is a fairly short amount of time, 2004 till now. I was going to ask you this later, but I'll ask you now. What's your life list? Are you a lister?
Oh yeah, I mean, everybody keeps a life list, don't they? If they're a birder, just about. just about. Or some sort of list.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, my list is kind of a typical for a world birder who's been at it for the time I have, and as enthusiastic as I've been. So it's around 6,000. Okay,
that's not too shabby.
Oh yeah, but I mean, it's a serious world birder just takes off from there.
Yeah. How did you get into birding in the first place?
Well, it was really a coincidence of things. I'd always been interested in nature. As a kid, I was keen to get out there and look at nature, fishing, and collecting things, butterflies and so on and
Yep.
so forth. My life trajectory took me in other directions, and I sort of didn't keep it up. And I never really got into birding until very late in life. And then it was being in Hong Kong and seeing all these new birds and thinking, my goodness, this is exciting. And having a friend who was interested in birds, whom I meet up with regularly on international trips, because as an academic, you go to a lot of conferences, you travel a lot, and I was always bumping into him. And every time I bumped into him, we went birding somewhere exotic and different.
Yeah.
And I really got hooked, absolutely got hooked on it in that way.
Yeah. You say there's well, you didn't say there's lots of birds, but you said there was exciting birds in Hong Kong. Are there many birds in Hong Kong? Because my family moved to China for a year, to Changchun, just in Chinese standards, a small city, probably about half the population of Australia. But this was before I was a birder, one of my biggest life regrets. But
you missed out.
Yeah, I missed out. But I don't remember seeing a single bird the whole time we were there. I've looked through all our photos, nothing, videos, nothing. So are there many birds in Hong Kong? You said there's exciting.
Yeah, the list of the Hong Kong list is, I don't know, somewhere close to 600. Okay. It's a migration hotspot.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of vagrants and a lot of excitement. And there are some really good birding spots within Hong Kong. Some good different and a lot of variety, mountains, marshes, Maipo marshes, and there's a very active Hong Kong bird watching society. So it's quite especially amongst expats, but not exclusively, and increasingly with the local Chinese birders and photographers. So it's a very active community, and
nice.
It's fun to get into it.
Now, besides birding, have you always been interested in writing? So on your website, on your blog, I was reading through your introduction to yourself, I think, and I was like, this is probably one of the best written examples of what being a birder is. I really enjoyed it. I was like, I'm going to ask Martin if I can steal that for something one day. But and your book's very well written. Have you always been a writer or interested in writing?
Yes, I mean, if you're an academic, if you work in a university, writing's a good half of your job. The other half is teaching, one half is writing and researching, and the other half is teaching. So, yeah, I've always enjoyed writing, and that was something that I took into my retirement. I thought I've got to go on doing something like I've always been doing, but not exactly the same. And the best thing to do was to write about my passion, which is birding.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if you've mentioned this just previously or not, but what was your academic area of expertise?
Well, I was I was in politics and public administration.
Okay.
And totally unrelated, and public policy. So I was interested in got interested in environmental issues in that direction, as well as from my birding sort of observations. So those two things came together in that sense. Yeah,
for sure. So to your book, so I've read through your book, and I did really enjoy it, actually, but it wasn't what I expected, although I'm not entirely sure what I expected it to be to begin with. But for those listening who haven't read it, I think it's a book that sort of, it looks at birders, it looks at the way that our choices impact nature and the way they impact the very things that we're out there to try and see, the birds around us. And I don't think it throws, excuse me, I don't think it throws any punches either way, like to birders or to communities or anything like that, but it sort of tries to maybe get people to think about the choices they make, I guess. Would you say that was what you were hoping to achieve through your book?
Yes, I mean, as a birder, for the last 20 years, sort of spending a lot of time out birding, I couldn't help but observe the loss of environmental environmental degradation and habitat loss, and it be in the midst of some of the sort of crisis points of this as a traveler, and I wanted to, as it were, and that was a bit of a shock, I mean, I was aware of environmental problems, but to see habitat destruction, to see it going on in front of your eyes, to go and look for birds and to find they're not there because instead there's a banana plantation.
Yeah. That
kind of experience really sort of, it's visceral. You suddenly realize, well, this is something that's happening, and so fast.
Yeah.
But I, began to think about, well, I'm out there enjoying observing birds, and at the same time observing this tragedy, this process, and how do I kind of fit those two things together? How can I take so much pleasure at the same time as seeing so much that is so distressing? And what does this mean for us as birders, in a sense? So it's a kind of personal sort of reflection and journey about coming to terms with this and trying to sort of communicate that and see if that rings a bell with other birders. So I'm not, as you say, I'm not proselytizing. I'm not saying this is right, this is wrong. I do raise questions about what harm we might be doing or what good we might be doing. And we're doing both, I think. But it's not like coming down and preaching.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to start our conversation by looking at birders and birding, and then moving more into the extinction side of the book. So birding as a modern day pastime is relatively new. How, in your book, how do you you talk about how birding actually came about? Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think to me there's sort of a decisive moment, as it were, if you want to sort of pick an event or something that sort of really signals that this is the origins of what we now think of as birding. May well be the Christmas bird count. Okay, the first Christmas bird count in the United States and Canada was in 1900, Christmas 1900. And at that point, this guy, Frank Chapman, who was an ornithologist, but also was an editor of a popular nature magazine called Bird Law, he decided and a group of friends to this Christmas day, to go out into their gardens or into their environments with their binoculars and count the number of birds that they could see. And this was a deliberate act as a kind of a challenge to what used to happen on Christmas Day, which was the Christmas shoot, the side hunt. The enthusiasts who were interested in birds would take their guns out and shoot them and count them and say, who's got the most, who's killed the most birds? And to Frank Chapman, this was part of his idea was, no, this is wrong. We can't go on doing this. And bird lovers, bird enthusiasts, we need to take a different view of how to enjoy being in nature and observing birds. And instead of shooting them and collecting them, we can just look at them and record them. And that bird count was, it was amateurs, it wasn't all ornithologists, it was enthusiasts as well as scientists who were taking part. It was a sort of a break with some other practices and ways of going on that previously dominated the world of bird loving or bird enthusiasm. So instead of collecting and shooting, you observed and recorded. And the thing that made this possible, and this is the critical thing, was that, as I said, they took their binoculars out into the gardens, into the fields. The invention of wearable, affordable, high quality binoculars, it wasn't an invention, evolution, the development in the late 19th century was really what made bird watching possible. And then at the same time, a kind of a reaction against shooting and hunting and slaughter of wild animals took place at exactly the same time in the Audubon Society and so on, part of that. And then from there, I mean, the Christmas bird count still goes on, as you know, every Christmas.
Yep.
It's a big thing. So there's a number of things about that. First of all, you've got to know what you're looking at. So ID skills and observation skills, fieldcraft are important. That's birding. You've got to record it, make a list. That's birding. You must leave things as you find them. You mustn't, do damage if you can help it. When you do this, that's modern birding. And from there, and it's a community. It's a group of people who are enthusiasts and bird lovers and nature lovers, but also see birding as a challenge. ID is a skill. Identification of birds is a skill. You need knowledge. You need a bit of technology to help you. And from there, I think everything that's developed in the birding world has sort of extended each of those aspects in one way or another. Better binoculars, cameras, recording equipment, bird field guides. They didn't exist until, like the next 20 or 30 years in the first part of the 20th century to help you do this. They weren't available before then. And everything kind of has developed very rapidly, particularly in the last 60 years to make an increasing technology. I mean, eBird, all of that is kind of sparked by that sort of set of circumstances that came together. So it's being a nature lover, being somebody who's skilled and is accepting the challenge of being, being able to record and see things and identify them, and then keeping a record. All of that is what we do as birders.
Yeah. What do you personally? What's the attraction to birding for you?
I think it's the nature lover part of it. It's the being in nature aspect of birding that turns me on.
Yeah.
I keep a list, right? I'm keen to know what I've seen, but it doesn't always matter. I mean, I can be wandering in the forest and listening to birds and not knowing everything I listen to, but I still enjoy myself. I still have a good time trying to see what I can see, taking delight in seeing, just seeing something that's exciting and new is fascinating and interesting.
Yeah.
And I mean, different birders have different sort of motivations, different ways of enjoying themselves, but that's what I find exciting and interesting, is being in nature, being there and experiencing something new, and the wonders of seeing things. For example, I was out with a group of birders the other day and we came across some lyrebirds, right?
Yep.
And it was really exciting to see a lyrebird. I mean, it's not often you see one. You can if you go to the right places, and you hear them a lot. And in fact, we watched 2 or 3 of these lyrebirds run across the track and then reappear, and around the corner, one of them, the male, started its display song, and it was magical, and all the people there were excited by that and loved it, and I think all birders would enjoy that, and but that's what really I look for and wait for and hope for when I go birding, that kind of experience.
Yeah, nice. You talk in your book, talking about birders, you talk in your book about bird watchers versus birders. When people have asked me in the past, non-birders, what the different types are, because it's amazing to me how many people know nothing about birding but still know the term twitcher. It's quite a lot of people, and so I always talk about bird watchers, birders, and twitchers, because not all birders, not all serious birders want to be classified as a twitcher. I think it has, within the birding circles anyway, connotations of someone who is more interested in the list than the bird itself. But in your book, you just talked about bird watchers versus birders. Do you think twitching is a whole nother level of, or is it just someone who has a different goal in birding?
Yeah, as you say, it's a term that has become popularized, and and used in the media as a substitute just for bird watchers, twitching. Now, you know, it's interesting that, to me, the idea, the origin of the notion of a twitcher is something that comes from particular forms of birding in England, the UK, in particular. The UK is a place where vagrants frequently, you know, frequently turn up as migrant, you know, on migration, you know, off course while migrating, both from east and west. You know, you get North American vagrants, you know, varied thrushes, ducks, their canvasbacks, and from the east you get, you know, Philosopher's warblers turning up in Norfolk, and all sorts of other things from all directions all the time. So you get these local rarities, these vagrants popping up all over the United Kingdom, and it's in that sense, Britain's a bit unusual in that there are so many and they're so varied. And this band of keen British birders, it would be in the 1950s, took on this kind of form of birding that came to be known as twitching, which is that they'd all be connected with each other as a little community. They'd have pages, and they'd be telling each other what was popping up in what part of the country, and they'd all pile into their cars and on their motorbikes and tear off to the other end of the country and see this bird usually before it died, because they're in the wrong place. and twitching became a highly competitive and sort of very frantic and exciting form of birding for this group of people. And going off and seeing a rare bird, or going to see a different kind of bird in a different place, which we all do as birders, got this connotation of twitcher. But the kind of madness and enthusiasm and sometimes the sheer stupidity, the craziness of that twitching activity, all-night drives, invading people's gardens, climbing over fences, hundreds of people queuing up, you know, looking over somebody's fence and so on. That is something that is fairly extreme and different, and originated, I think, in that period. So twitching is not something that I think describes what most birders do most of the time. You know, just generally speaking. I mean, you go and travel to look for birds that are new in a different environment. That's not twitching. You go and look for a rarity that turns up in your neighborhood. You could call that a twitch, but I mean, no, it's just you like to see rarities. I think the bad name for twitchers comes from the fact that they're the people who tread on your lettuces when the bird's in your garden. They're the people who tear around and clog the country lanes in Britain with their cars when there's something exciting to see and getting everybody's way. So it's does have a bad connotation. But I don't want it to apply. I don't think it applies to most birders or most of what they do.
Yeah. Have you ever done what you would call a twitch in Australia yourself?
Have I done a twitch? I don't go for it. No, I mean, I happened to be in Cairns when the Northern greenshank was on.
That's lucky.
on the Esplanade, and I thought but it was just a coincidence that I was going to Cairns for another reason. And while I was there, it was running up and down in the mud, you know. So you could say that wasn't a twitch in my view, but I had, you know, if something turns up I watch eBird. If something turns up in Canberra or in the neighbourhood that's new and exciting, I might go to that site and look for it, but that's not. But I'd just as well stay home and wait for the next time, you know.
You have a chapter in your book on what is tickable, and obviously talking about twitchers, they are fully aware of what is tickable, and perhaps some of them might even stretch that a little bit. But I wanted to ask your opinion as someone who has done a lot of international birding, where we draw the line about what is tickable on somebody's list. So obviously the generic statement is that it has to be wild, has to be a self-sustaining population. I guess, although then that, we'll go with that. I've got a few examples here that I wanted to run past you, but what's your example of tickable? Would you agree with those two? Would you add anything? Would you?
Yeah, I think the ABA definition of what you can tick is, contains, I think, words like you've used, but also another word, alive. that's important.
True.
Alive and unrestrained. Unrestrained mean that it's free flying, or it doesn't fly. It can just go where it likes. Unrestrained, alive and unrestrained. And in that sense of unrestrained, there's a sort of subtext, which is that its presence where you see it should not be the direct result of human intervention of some form. Now, there are some finer points here which twitchers often come up against, like in Britain, quite a few rare birds from North America have arrived on board ships. They're off course, they're in the middle of the Atlantic, it's stormy, there's a ship, they land, and they just sit there until it comes to port. Now, when it flies off and lands, it's unrestrained, but it's got there with the help of human intervention. That is, a ship got in its way and it landed. But you can tick that because it wasn't in a box. It wasn't. It chose to land on a ship, and it arrived in that way on its own, under its own volition, not under its own steam, but under its own volition. So that's okay. And there are other sort of fine points where you wonder whether, like, as you say, introduced species, vagrants, are they breeding? Is the population sustainable? And so on. So, I don't worry about it a lot. It doesn't crop up that often when in normal birder's life, but sometimes it does. In Hong Kong, there's a population of yellow-crested cockatoos. They originate in places like Komodo and Indonesia, on the islands, and they're there because for some reason they're escapees from the cage bird trade, or there's one story. One story is that it was the British governor of Hong Kong had an aviary, and when, just in anticipation of the Japanese landing in 1940, he let them free. He let his yellow cockatoos free, and they loved it. And they breed, and they've done very well. Okay, they're countable because they're a sustainable population, even though they're obviously not. In fact, they're an important global subpopulation of that species, which is very much threatened by extinction. So, and then in Hong Kong, you're always worried when you see a new bird. Is it a different bird, a vagrant? Is it an escapee from a cage? Or that's another sort of tickable question. Is it an escapee? Can we put it on the Hong Kong list? Is it breeding? These are finer points for the committees.
Yeah, and there was a discussion recently on a Facebook group. I can't remember which one it was, whether it was the Australian Twitchers Facebook group or like a state group, where someone put up a bird and it was everyone thought it was likely to be an escapee, but there was no real proof, like it could fly very well. It didn't have any leg bands, but it shouldn't have been there. And it was a huge, big, 100-odd comment discussion over it. And I haven't looked at it, so I don't know what they decided. But, some people were like, well, I'll tick it until proven otherwise. And other people were like, well, I won't tick it until proven otherwise. So like a lot of birding, just comes down to your own personal preference. Yes.
I mean, your list is your own thing. I mean, what do you have, what you tick is your own business.
Yeah.
It's only if you try and put it on eBird or try.
Yeah.
Or if you say we should add this to the county list or the state list, that's when it becomes an issue. And the keepers of those lists, they have a good time, I think. But, it doesn't really bother me.
Yeah. One of the ones that I've had come up quite a few times, actually, someone that I took on tour had this question for me, and I think probably two other people have asked me about the peacocks in Mount Isa at the lake, and the sort of they're definitely wild, like they're not living in a cage. They're self-sustaining, but would they be self-sustaining if there wasn't a whole bunch of people leaving scraps of food around? Don't know. But then, are people just another part of nature as a whole? I don't know. So I've said, I don't know.
Yeah.
Tick it if you want to.
Make your own mind up. Yeah. I mean, every bird lives in an environment that is impacted by humans. There's no part of the world, no part of the wild that is not impacted by humans in some form or another.
Yeah.
And where you draw the line as to how much of that impact makes it difficult to say, oh, this is a wild bird. I mean, we tick birds that come to feed us that we put out. Once a bird has escaped and it breeds, then we can tick those birds. So I mean, there are fine lines. It doesn't. It's not the biggest thing as far as I'm concerned as to what the rules are about ticking things or not ticking things. Yeah. If you like looking at peacocks, go for it.
Yeah. Do you? So you mentioned in your book that there's lots of. I think you do mention what your lists are or is, but I can't remember. But you mentioned in your book all the different types of lists that people have. There's like there's a Facebook group for people who find birds on Google Maps. Street View. There's people who make lists for birds they see on TV shows. So literally everything. But what do you keep lists for personally?
I have a life list, and that's about it. Okay. I used to keep an office window list when I had an office.
Yep.
I live in an apartment now. I haven't started an apartment window list yet, but that's something I might do. I don't know. This is a piece of entertainment, but it's not a serious matter to me.
Yeah.
I don't have for instance, I'm an ACT birder, and I bird a lot of people, and I don't have an ACT list. I don't bother. I don't have a year list for the ACT. That doesn't get me going. But I know a lot of people do, and it's a way to, particularly if you're a local birder, it's a way to keep you on the go.
Yeah.
Oh, it's January the 1st. Let's go. let's start the year list again, and that's great. I've got no reason to say that it's just not. It doesn't. I just need to get out and look. That's all, and that gets me going.
Yeah, for sure. So, moving on from lists, I want to ask your opinion as someone who has birded a lot of countries. Okay. Jumping forward a couple of questions, then coming back. How many countries have you birded in?
Oh, I think it's somewhere approaching 50. It's something like 40 to 50 countries. Yeah. There's a whole lot of parts of the world I haven't been to. Africa, I've only done a few countries in Africa.
Okay.
And probably too late now to fill those gaps as far as I'm concerned.
Never too late as long as you've got a heartbeat. I was just looking through some photos yesterday, actually, of when I was in Africa, and I was like, oh man, I want to travel again. I could go back to Africa in a heartbeat, and probably will. So here's my question that I was going to ask. How have you found Australia as a nation, or an Australians? How have you found them compared to other countries in terms of their interest and care about nature? So this might get me in trouble a little bit, but I don't think Australians are particularly interested as a whole in nature compared to other countries that I've birded in and been to, which I think is a shame, but that might just be my own opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting.
I'm just about to get invaded by my children here. I'll just shut the door.
Hello.
Bear with me for 1 second.
That's okay. Hello. Australians and nature. It's a interesting puzzle to me. I mean, there's two things. One, originally, nature in Australia, or the environment, or the bush, was hostile.
Yeah,
it was something to be defeated and overcome, and it was scary. And pioneers, you know, those paintings of the campfires and the families and the gravestones. I mean, it was you know, the pioneers who were out in the bush were facing a challenging and hostile environment, and it was scary, and the creatures were different and strange and unusual, bizarre. So that was not to the original settlers an object of love or appreciation. In fact, they brought their own nature with them. The acclimatization societies deliberately imported birds, plants, insects, everything, you know, rabbits, all sorts, to try to make Australia feel more like home, Europe. And that's why we have blackbirds and goldfinches on our list. Yeah. And so nature has always been a bit, you know, there's been a bit of an ambiguity about enjoying Australian natural phenomena. That's changed a lot, I think. I mean, I think in the last 50, 60 years or more, and before that, there's been a kind of reaction to that, which is to say, let's really appreciate the bush as it is. Let's appreciate Australian environment and birds and so on. And of course, it is, when you get to closely look at it, spectacular. I mean, I think Australia is one of the best birding locations in the whole of the world, and it is fabulous, amazing. So yeah, now people, I think, are more likely to be positive in their view of Australian natural world and nature. So but there's still this ambiguity, I think. There's still this sort of reservation about getting out there and appreciating. Now in Britain, you know, what is the natural world is a familiar landscape, and it's in fact a man-made landscape. The landscape is agricultural. It's country parks. It's not the wilderness. It's not that hostile wild place where you meet all sorts of wolves and tigers and so on. It's friendly and natural. Yeah. So I think that, you know, there's that difference. And of course, our wilderness is very, you know, our deserts, our forests they are full of creepy crawlies and crocodiles, and you'll die of thirst if you don't look out if you're in the desert. Yeah. So there is that tension. But I think Australians that I've met, and I mean, I think, and in particular now, with the conservation movement, are really into it. I think it's a bit. I would say it's a bit unfair to make a direct comparison like that between Australia and other developed nations about their attitudes towards nature these days. I think we're pretty into it, pretty onto it.
Yeah, sweet. Well, I'm happy to be wrong if that's the case.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about some of the stories that you've got in your book. So, the way your book is laid out, you sort of got you got a chapter on a specific place that you went, and the birding and some of your feelings and the what's the word, destruction, the environmental damage that's being caused through one form or another. So I wanted to start by talking about first questions first. Now I've forgotten what it's called. What's the age that you talk about that we're in, like the human?
Oh, that right, unpronounceable, the Anthropocene. The
Anthropocene, that's what I want to pronounce
it. Anthropocene, okay.
Do you want to just run us through that a little bit? Because that plays a fair part in the whole scheme of things.
Yeah, so there's this theory that is circulating in geological circles about the fact that we are now living in an era, a geological era, like the Holocene or the Pliocene or whatever, which we call the Anthropocene, which is characterized by the fact that it is the first time that the impacts of humans on the planet is going to leave a geological record in the strata of the Earth, is going to be observable by future geologists in coming millennia, if there are any such things, people. And that, it consists of a number of things. One is our impact on the natural world. The Anthropocene is when the sixth mass extinction is taking place, and it's human influenced and made. That is, that the number of wild creatures are going extinct or are threatened or have gone extinct because of our activities, the spread of population, agriculture, etc., and now increasingly climate change. And we'll observe that in the record too. Another thing we'll observe is the stuff that we make and leave behind, the concrete, the chicken bones. The chicken bones will be, why have all these chickens suddenly appeared in the geological record? Their bones in all sorts of, to the extent that we leave chicken bones behind. We kill 60 billion chickens a year, so that's lots of bones. Yeah. In order to be, and so this again is a concrete, plastic, and so on, and all the sort of the detritus of the fossil fuel era. So yeah, all of that is going to be observable as a geological record, and it's all within an eye blink, compared with the millennia that preceded it. Within hundreds of years, thousands of years, and in particular in the last 100, 200 years, Industrial Revolution. And
well, I was going to say, since the Industrial Revolution, we've had a that would have to be where humans' impact has started to be the greatest from. Just everything that we've produced, essentially. And that's clearly observable. And I mean, it started long before that with the destruction of megafauna, like in Australia, megafauna by many people think it's because of human hunting, but there are other things too. But that's sort of been going on a bit longer. But yes, the really quick, sudden, dramatic impact is the last couple of hundred years, and the sixth mass extinction, as it's called, is what you come up against as part of that in Go Birding. Yeah, sure. All right, to the stories in your book. So the first one I wanted to talk to you was about the story where you went to the Pantanal in Brazil. It's Pantanal in Brazil?
Yeah, the Pantanal. Yeah, most of it's in Brazil.
Yeah. So this was just reading through your books. This was the number one place that I was like, that is where I want to go. Interestingly enough, the company that Bellbird, the company that I tour for, we do a trip there. So if Peter's listening, happy to go.
Go, yeah.
But it reminded me. It reminded me of one of my favorite experiences when I was overseas in Uganda. We were, I won't go into the whole story, but we had to trek across this island. We had to swim through small, I don't know, you'd probably call them billabongs in Australia. I don't know what the equivalent is over there. Walk up hills and machete our way through undergrowth, and it was just like alive with nature, bugs and insects and birds overhead. And there was like this, we saw this huge python swimming through the water just before we had to swim through it ourselves. So that was always good. But it one of your quotes from that section was, I came away with a sense that here was a rare place where we could get a glimpse of what much of the world must have once been like, home to an astonishing abundance of wildlife, relatively secure in habitats that humans had yet completely to transform. And that was how I felt about that scenario, and how you say you felt about the Pantanal. I was just wondering, how do you, because you also talk about the human impact in that place as well. So Can you expand on that at all?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in a sense, that sentiment, that feeling was an illusion. All right. The Pantanal is so different now
Yes,
than what it may have been, 500, 600 years ago, 100 years ago, because of the ranching and the cattle within there. But still, I mean, it's an astonishing area. It's a vast. It's the biggest swamp in the world. It's a vast floodplain. I mean, it's nearly the size of Victoria as one wetland system. It's astonishing. So you can go in all directions if you could, and you can't, of course, in most of it because it's inaccessible. You will find the habitat and creatures in those places and across a vast area of country. But the little edges of it that you can access as a birder give you a taste of this, and it really is. I mean, you can't go in the wet season. You get bogged in, right? A lot of it is inaccessible. You go when it's not that wet, but there are still places where the creatures have to congregate in order, in the right habitats along the rivers, in the wet bits that still exist, where you can see just what diversity and abundance there is in this environment most of the year. And so birding in that area, I mean, the first thing that catches your eye when you're walking down, looking into the waters and into the forest, into the trees, onto the open country, is just how many crocodiles there are. There are crocodiles everywhere. Cayman, the species of crocodile, and there are other creatures. There are reptiles which pop up all over the place. Big ones, not just little ones, as you say. Pythons, anaconda that you watch them cross the road and they're still going and they're taking up the whole road. It's that big. And capybara, big vermin, huge great things, and anteaters, all sorts. And it's as I say, it's the abundance. It's the fact that there is such a ferment of wildlife and of everything's everybody else's prey. And you see this, except the crocodiles, and you see this in action, and then down the end of the road is the jaguar experience. Everybody goes to see the jaguars on the riverbanks, which are living in a wild state, and most people get to see them. And the bird abundance, again, the bird life abundance, the raptors fishing in the waters, the jabiru, the owls, even, and of course the crows and everything. And it's just overwhelming, that kind of experience, to see that kind of diversity and abundance all packed into a couple of weeks or even less of travel, and stay a few places in each location. And but of course, I just read the other day, I mean, there was an article about the bushfires in Pantanal. Climate change means it's drying out. Less runoff from the highlands, from the less. The cattle farmers have always cleared grazing areas after the wet season with fire. And these days, when you light that fire, it's so dry that peat catches fire, and the whole countryside, it just smokes away and burns. So it's that is happening in front of your eyes as well. So it's a kind of, it makes you reflect on how much has changed, how much we are just missing out on from what we've done in those environments. And these stories of abundance and then scarcity are everywhere if you look at the record of the natural world. Would
you say? So I wanted to ask you about the. I think it's in I think you said it's in Cambodia. I don't know how you pronounce it. Siama or Siama?
Yeah, the Siama, we get Siama protected forest here in the west.
So that forest there obviously has is much more, would you say, visible destruction, or is the Pantanal just as visible with fires and cattle and?
Yeah, no, I think for the visitor in the Pantanal, you don't get to see a lot of you don't get to realize a lot of the changes that might have taken place, all the reasons for that. And when we came across one, going down the highway, which is just a dirt road, we came across one mob of cattle, and the gauchos sort of, shooting them along, and we had to wait for 10 minutes, but they disappeared down the side road after a while. And you still see so many. I mean, there are still more crocodiles than cattle in the Pantanal. Yeah. So you still see it as if it was a wild place in most of the time.
There is one. I was just going to say, there's one photo in your book of someone, I don't know if it's you or not, getting very up close to some caiman maybe, or some crocodiles of some sort, taking a photo. So quite a few of them. Sorry, you were going to say?
Yeah, but if you go to, as you say, you brought up the Cambodian case, the Siama protected forest. Yes, I mean, if you go to a place like that, we were with a guide a great guy who took us there, and he hadn't been there for a year. He said, we go down here, and I think we might find a peacock pheasant, a German peacock pheasant. And we walked down this track, and we walked, and we walked, and we walked, and all we saw was mud and logs and cleared bush. And he said, oh, no, they're gone. Won't find them now. So you sit, and while we were walking down that track, a guy on a motorbike came past us, and he was a ranger with his uniform. And so you realize that this is something that is happening under our eyes, under their eyes. This protected forest is just being logged into a state of, where it's no longer a viable habitat for most of the creatures that used to live there. So it's, of course, I mean, there are people fighting, for its existence as a forest. There are Cambodians, there are NGOs, there are rangers, some rangers who are doing the right thing, others are not, but there are some rangers who are doing the right thing. So there's a kind of battle going on about this. And one thing I felt as birders, that we may have been helping in contributing to that battle, because the local people could see, here we were, a bunch of foreigners with a local guide who were doing something, staying in a hotel, doing something for the economy, providing some means of sustenance and income that was dependent on the existence of this forest. And although by logging it, they can make a quick buck, maybe that in the long run is not the best way to go. So I kind of felt, well, maybe there's a way to go here for conservation movement and a bit of support from birders to sort of combat this sort of outcome. But it's depressing.
Yeah, this is a question that I didn't have planned, but just thought of it just then. Is there any sort of birding, whether it's this is going to be a very sort of nebulous comment, which you might not have an answer for, but is there any sort of birding from pelagic to rainforest to third world countries to developed nations to whatever, where you perhaps feel like the benefit of birding tourism doesn't outweigh the negatives that it brings?
I think the benefits of birding tourism are visible wherever I go birding, but in some cases you're scratching the surface. In other cases, it's a real impact and an important impact. Now, and it's mostly sort of bits and pieces that you see as the positive signs. Like a particular species that is being looked after by a local community because birders trot up every now and again to look at it, and they make money out of it. This happens all the time when you're in developing countries, in China, in Cambodia, in South America, all over. So there are local communities who benefit from birding tourism, call it tourism if you like, but birding visits. And I feel it's always just scratching the surface. I mean, we're there as one, in a sense, as one part of the process by which human activity extends and impacts everywhere where there are wild creatures.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got to get in, we've got to use the roads that they build for logging. If sometimes we may encourage the building of more roads because it's an accessible nature reserve. Yeah. To make it accessible, maybe we encourage those sorts of economic changes and activities in the community which move their focus away from living with nature, but more to living depending on the modern economy.
Yeah.
So maybe there's even a sort of a quid pro quo. It's a very complicated.
It is very complicated.
Process and activity.
I was going to ask you. I have a quote here that you wrote about Madagascar, but I feel like you might have just answered it. But I'll read it out anyway and see if you want to add anything to it. Talking about Madagascar, it says here, not only are the means of making a human living from the environs precarious, they also often challenge a birder's reason for being there by helping destroy the natural habitats they have come to visit. Do you feel like that's just expanding on what you've just said in terms of, we need roads to get places, we need accommodation to stay in that they might build in a forest that they have to chop down the trees to build the accommodation, etc. Yeah,
and I think that was a bit of a clumsy sentence. Sorry about that. You had to, anyway. But I mean, the specifics of that case was to observe the impacts of charcoal burning and charcoal production on the Madagascan dry forests. They're just being decimated by being chopped down, and of course they don't regenerate because of climate change, because of increasing prevalence of droughts and so on. They don't regenerate. So you see the local communities who are desperately trying to scratch a living out of this changing environment, and it's a very marginal environment, turning to charcoal production as their only safe means of livelihood. Yeah. You drive down the road and you see in front of every village house, you see a sack of charcoal, which is sitting there waiting to be picked up by to be sort of taken to the cities and so on. So it's, and when you see that, you think, well, we're just turning up here. We're not doing anything about that problem. We're just going to the remnants of what's left of this natural environment where there's a lodge, a hotel. We're sort of stopping and looking occasionally at a place where we might find an endemic species. And then we're just turning around and driving out again and leaving behind a continuing process of change that is detrimental to what we've come to look at. Yeah. And we're kind of, turning up there at the last minute, as it were, and then going away again. We're turning up there just to make sure we're there in time, because if maybe at some point in the next 10 years you won't be able to go down there and see the same wildlife as you can now. Yeah. So it's more a sense of oh look, this is can we be doing something else that would do more good than just coming and going? Yeah. Without binoculars. So, but that's that's just a sort of an emotional reaction to the situation. Yeah,
and I think like you and I individually, and really, apart from maybe like 4 or 5 of the richest people in the world, there's nothing that we can do as individuals to change the whole economy of Madagascar, can we? But is there anything you say in your book? You're not trying to apportion blame, because everyone has their own. Everyone has to survive. one way or another.
Mm.
But is there anything you think that birders could do or should do differently?
I don't know. I mean, I think there are some aspects of birding that occasionally, as a birding tourist, you sort of stop and think, "Oh, we shouldn't be doing this." And that's a variety of things. But one is, of course, the level of intrusion that you bring as a birder into an environment. But you're only a small part of that intrusion, and you can easily say, well, if we didn't come, it wouldn't make any difference, because there's so much bigger intrusion by others, by corporations, by business people, by other tourists, by local people who've got to make a living, and so on. So there's not a lot, as you say, there's not a lot that one can do that would make a difference. And I don't think that, I think in general, on balance, birding tourism and birding travelers are a little chink of light of hope, as it were, in sustaining economies in these areas that may help to preserve some of that natural world that we go to look for. So I'm generally positive about the benefits of global international birding, generally positive. But you just have to take care and be thoughtful. And sometimes sometimes I'm moved to say, well, look, having done this and taken advantage of this and not left anything behind, I ought to make a contribution to an NGO that is doing something in that locality, that is, help them sustain that activity. I've paid my bills to the lodge they've set up in their reserve, but now maybe I should make another contribution of some kind if I can. And maybe I should take one less trip and spend that money in that other way. So maybe it's again, yes, it's an individual thing. It's a matter of conscience. It's a matter of how far you want to take it and what you think you can do. I don't think the birding community needs to do more than well, it can always do more, right? But we in our birding clubs and our birding associations and our touring companies, our tour companies do a lot of good for preserving environments, making people aware of what's out there. Maybe even, you can say citizen science that we do with birds has some contribution to make. All that is very positive. So I think the more of that we do as birders, the better. But don't give up birding.
just all resign ourselves to being backyard birders, and that's it.
No, I think that's no, I don't. No, that's not the way to go either. As I say, I think that global birding and birding tourism is a net positive. Really, I do think.
The last question I had on this was, do you think? I feel like I already know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyway. Do you think developed countries, Australia being one of them, are better as a generalization, better at preserving nature than developing countries?
If you look at what we have to do these days to preserve what's left of nature, then, well, yes, because it costs money, and there's a stronger political momentum behind conservation movements. We can afford it. We're willing to commit resources to it. There's a scientific ornithological community that is quite active and powerful, that looks after, it has reserves, looks after extinct birds that are going extinct, like the orange-bellied parrot. I mean, the amount of activity and what resources that have gone into trying to retain a viable population of orange-bellied parrots in Australia is astonishing. It's really great. It's so yes, I mean, I think that generally speaking, but this is more a matter of economics and practical practicalities, I think.
Yeah.
I go to developing countries, and there are very, you meet people who are really concerned about what's happening in their countries, and they're losing their heritage, their environment, their nature, what they've grown up with. I mean, there's just as much anxiety and dismay about it in many of those countries as there is in developed countries. But they're also resigned to the fact and aware of the fact that they don't have the luxury, as it were, of taking the kind of steps that we may want to take. So that's always going to be an issue, I think. But it's but I mean, having said that, I think that we as developed countries do have a history that is just like those of developing countries, and we've done the same things in our own backyards as they see happening now. So we do need to do what we do in our local backyards to look after nature, do that more actively internationally through various forms of funding and so on. But birders, I think, generally are all onto this, and I think we generally on the right side of things when it comes to how we respond to these sorts of things, both in developed and in developing nations. Yeah.
So I've got 2 more questions for you. First of all, did you have any other points or thoughts that you wanted to share that I haven't, that are particularly important to you that I haven't asked?
Well, no, not really. I think. I mean, I make quite a thing in the book about the difference between your patch birder and your world birder, and I think that both we see people who are both keen on their own localities as birders, who are doing a lot of good and enjoying themselves just as much as we see people like me who have travelled a lot and get into global world birding, big listing, whatever you want to call it. But I do think that in all of us do benefit from reflecting on how much we need to be aware of the possibility that we are doing harm as well as good, and think about that. And as I said, I don't want to moralize, preach, but because I think that most birders do think about that all the time.
Yeah. So my last question to you, I'd like to know what your favourite place to go birding in Australia is, and because you have, so this is a 2-part question, because you have birded overseas significantly, the second question is, if you had 24 hours to go birding, where would you go in the world? So 2-part question.
Okay. Look, Australia, I don't know. As I said, I'd almost be able to answer this in one both questions in the same breath, because Australia is a terrific, global hotspot for birding. I don't think Australians appreciate just how much it is. Although maybe as you as a touring guide know that how many foreign birders love to come to Australia. But the place that I would always go if I was said, where do you want to go birding? I'd go to Cape York, northern Queensland. I mean, Cape York's a big place, so the Atherton Tablelands, or Mount Lewis, or Iron Ranges, anywhere up there. It's brilliant. I mean, I do love tropical birding, so I do love hot country, hot weather birding, tropical birding. So it's just so, as you said, you get this sense of life and abundance that you don't get in temperate birding locations, most of them. So that's my choice. I get on the plane to Cairns, drop a hat, and head north. So that's I think a lot of Australian birders would say that, actually. I think I've asked that question to everyone who comes on, and I think Iron Range is
number one. I think most people have, well, more people have said Iron Range than anywhere else.
I've only been there once, and when I was there, it was my visit. It was in the wet season. My visit was preceded by a cyclone, so I had a 4-day trip that ended up being 2 days.
Yeah,
there we are. That's the Iron Ranges for you.
Yes.
Yeah. The other question: where in the world? Well, yeah. Let me mention. Maybe I'll mention just one place, one very specific location that I really left me with a lasting memories that are different from other places, and that's a reserve in Brazil, in the Atlantic forests of Brazil, just north of Rio de Janeiro. It's a reserve called Guiapiaçu, which is unpronounceable, and Guiapiaçu. That's it. Or maybe it's Guapiaçu. I can't remember now. Yeah, Guapiaçu. Anyway, it's a reserve that is being set up by a private landowner who has decided that instead of raising cattle, he's going to plant forests and reserve what is left of the Atlantic rainforest in his particular locality. And he's teamed up with other local landowners and industrialists, and they've set up this magnificent preserved habitat of Atlantic Brazilian Atlantic forest. And there are terrific birds there. It's wonderful birding, and it's kind of inspiring to be there, as well as a great birding spot. There's a foundation that that helps fund the place. They do educational activities for the local school children. They try to encourage other landowners to do the same as they're doing, and they're having an impact on it, making a difference. So again, this is a birding experience that is connected to a good news story about preserving habitat. They have a terrific bunch of local guides who will take you around. They know the localities inside out. As you know, you need that when you go somewhere new. You need local expertise to help you find things and see things, know what you're looking at, and that's just so it's great. It's great location, and that's where I have some of I was there on my own. There were other people at the lodge, and we teamed up. It was a great experience.
Yeah, nice.
So there. I'll just make sure I got this right. Let me just check the name of the place. Yeah, it's Guiapiaçu. Guapiaassu.
Excellent. Sweet. Yeah. We'll make a note. Well, Martin, thanks for giving us. We've probably ticked over an hour now. Thanks for giving us a chunk of your morning, and all the best with whatever else you get up to, and we'll put a link to your book and to your webpage, and people can have a look.
Yep. Okay. Thanks very much. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you.